LDComics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sandra Bell-Lundy and Nicola Streeten as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeten. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
So Brighton Book Festival, I guess I had this wild dream last year where I thought, oh, what I should do is join Brighton Book Festival, and then discovered that there wasn't one, and then realised actually that's probably a good idea because most book festivals I've ever been to are quite boring and don't really care about marginalised authors, and just are a lot of really, really old white men sitting in wingback chairs talking about their fly fishing issues and stuff like that I find quite dull. Sorry for all the old white men watching right now who love fly fishing. But for the rest of you, I thought let's create a book festival that looks like the people that I know, that represents the authors that I think are wonderful and who are slogging their guts out and not getting much of a platform. And so I wandered over to Ruth's shop at the other side of Brighton and said, hey, want to do a book festival? And apparently I'm not the only crazy person in Brighton. And she said yes. So then, we pulled in the Nicolas and a few more people who share Nicola's way of thinking, I think, and said, hey, do you want to help us put a book festival together? So we had our first meeting to create Brighton Book Festival 2 weeks before Christmas. And when I said to the team that I wanted the book festival to be in June, they said, do you mean June 23? And I said, no, I mean June 22. And so after they all finished laughing hysterically and crying, they then all said, yeah, why not? Let's try it. So here we are, 5 and a bit months later. And we have probably the greatest book festival you'll ever come across in your life. Some people might think I'm biased, but I actually genuinely am not. I've never seen a better book festival in all my years of living in the whole earth. And of course, I've thoroughly researched this and looked at every book festival that's ever existed in the whole earth. And this is the greatest that you'll ever come across. And so you'll be thinking, how can I get involved in this amazing book festival? Good question. The best thing to do is to go to brightonbookfestival.co.uk. There is another online event this week if you cannot get to Brighton. But I mean, to be honest, if you live anywhere in the southern hemisphere of the world, it's worth just traveling to Brighton. A, because it's a beautiful place, but also, why would you want to miss the greatest book festival that has ever existed? You see, there are so many wins in this. There are so many wins. But a bit more about the book festival is that we made the decision to focus on marginalised authors and creating a book festival that was accessible. So it's not called a literary festival. It's called a book festival. That's quite important for me. We've kept the ticket prices accessible so that people from all economic backgrounds are able to attend. I think that book festivals are just as important for 5-year-old children as they are grown adults. And so there is a plethora, love that word, that's my word for today, a plethora of events going on that cover all the age groups. And we have just the greatest things ever. We've got a panel which is looking at masculinity. And we've got two Black guys just talking about what is their journey through masculinity been. Never going to see that anywhere else in the literary world. We have a panel with Saba Khan looking at graphic novels, which is just like such a coup to get her. Dorothy Coomson is our author in residence for any crime thriller fans. That's not hard to say, is it? And what else have we got? Oh goodness, I'm running out of things, Ruth, help me here. We've got Myth of the Mainstream, which is a panel that is looking at books that became mainstream when really should they have, which I love as well, because that's what it's about when you're supporting marginalised authors. A family festival. We've got an incredible event called Lyric and Lines, which is we gave a group of around 25 young people a book and said, why don't you create soundtracks to different parts of this book? And that's what they've gone away and done. And then the author, Shannon Smart, is with us reading excerpts from her book over these soundtracks that these young people have created. I mean, this stuff is so good. I can see the excitement in all of your eyes. You're thrilled and you'll really want to get involved. So don't forget, it's brightonbookfestival.co.uk. And there you go.
So yeah, I would start the whole, conversation around this project that kind of triggered it or kind of started it all for me. This project called Ceciliad, which is a project talking about safety for women in public spaces. So the project was all about having various different interventions in public spaces to talk about how, a lot of spaces are not really accessible for women and how it causes a lot of threats to their existence. And I was personally attacked on the street, and I felt it was one of those very important issues to address. That's how Cecilia started. But prior to Cecilia, just a small introduction is this project that I did called Manifest, which was documenting or doing this whole performance of drag kings in Bangalore in India. And that's how I kind of really got into the idea of performance in photography and things that way. So that led to Cecilia, which I'll come to. So Cecilia is a project that I started in 2019. It's basically trying to look at spaces where women were attacked the most and why these spaces are unsafe, and what is feminist geography and what are the different ways in which things went wrong in these spaces. So Cecilia, who is standing, who is in the screen, is someone who I met 8 years ago. I saw her on a cycle with a cape, darting through the street, and I was like, oh my God, this is the person I need to meet. I need to talk to this person. And that's how I kind of met her. And she was already a beautiful person, had this crazy personality to herself. And we were having a drink and we were talking to each other, and we said, there's this, I want to do this project. And she said, will I be famous? Can you make me famous? I said, yeah, okay, let's work on that. And then we started like doing this project together. So we did a lot of interventions. We did a lot of like, meetings in different spaces. Cecilia was always there. We also released a toll-free number, and we did these performances in these spaces where women were attacked the most. So Cecilia would actually be brought into these spaces in a very grand gesture manner, and then she would inaugurate the street, which was already open, but we were trying to have these conversations in these spaces. As you can see, these are all like, she loves to perform again, and she would bring in these clothes and we would take photographs together. One of the reasons why I started, talking about this project today is primarily because to see how Cecilia in real life slowly transformed into a comic. And if you see in a lot of her glasses, I don't know in these, but yeah, there's these D and G glasses, which everybody thought was Dolce and Gabbana glasses, but they were actually a gender disruptor glasses, So if you look at the mirror, it reverses and then it becomes gender disruptor. And so this was a zine that we had brought out, a comic strip, which primarily talked about safety in public transport. and how Cecilia became the superhero person. And she actually came into the metro or the subway that was where a woman was being attacked, and how she kind of saves that girl. So this zine was circulated very widely in a lot of the schools and colleges. And then, yeah, this is the last page of the zine where she, takes care of that one matter that happened in the subway, and then she has a smoke and she goes back home. As you see, this was the second zine, because during the pandemic, what had happened is a lot of the violence and the domestic and attacks on the street were being actually moved indoors. So the domestic violence cases were increasing quite a bit. So this was a zine that we made about what was happening in indoor, and how Cecilia then comes and helps. Like, there was a father and mother that was fighting, and there was a bit of physical violence that happened, and how Cecilia gets the call, and then she comes and then she saves the day. Again, goes back after she takes care of the. So this is quite interesting. So how different people started kind of making Cecilia part of their lives, and how she became the superhero. So and then it was quite interesting. Like, now this is a permanent mural in Bangalore, where part of the comic strip has actually gone on to a wall, and it's written in the local language, which says, "We need to keep our people safe, or our women safe." And it was quite interesting, because the people who get down from the subway, and the women especially who wait for public transport, say that they feel comfortable standing in front of this mural, because they know that they're kind of safe, So it's quite interesting to see how this project then transformed into a mural and into a book and a comic strip and things like that. So yeah, so this is the mural that is there. And part of the British Council project is also this large zine festival. So for me, it was important. We were part of the WOW Creating Heroines workshop, and everybody was given a grant to do something or to make something. And for me, it was important to give back in some way or the other. And I run an arts community center in Bangalore called Kanike, and it was important for me to kind of have this large zine festival. And it was so overwhelming to see close to 160 to 70 different zines from South Asia come into the space, and people coming and enjoying the zines. And this zine festival went on for close to 3 full months. So it was quite interesting for me to see how the space transformed, and the people were interacting very well with all the zines. And every zine that was bought was directly, each of the artists benefited from that directly. So that was also quite interesting to see the culture of zines actually come out quite a bit during that time. Another thing that I wanted to share, one second, I'm just going to quickly change the screen. Is also to talk about the space that I opened after the whole, the idea of safety for women in public places. I was very keen on actually opening a space which is in the public area, but for women to come and rest, scream, scratch, do whatever they wanted. So it was a leisure center for women. So this is the space called Namakate, which is basically something that I recently started as a leisure center for women. So this is what the space looks like. Each of the cloth is actually stories that women shared about themselves. So it became the center where we actually sat together, spoke about multiple different things, and then women wanted to share their personal stories. It started with 5 to 10 stories, which eventually became 500 plus stories as of today. Because once they realized that another person was sharing, they felt comfortable in the space to kind of share. And we also have the swing, which you see in the center, that is installed. And it is a space for everybody to come and sit and swing. And this is on the day. So I've always wanted to dance on the streets in India. And this is something which is not so easy for women to do. on the day of the opening of the center, we played loud music and we all danced on the streets and we had like a lot of fun. So this was the opening day of the space. These are the stories that each of the women started. Again, it was not with their names, but they were just sharing very personal stories. And yeah, it just grew from 5 to 10 to 20 to, as of today, 500 plus stories. So it was very beautiful to see how these women were, bringing these stories together. And the idea is to kind of make like a cloth book out of it, to kind of, go through these stories and stitch them all together as well. So the women enjoy the swing on an everyday basis. Swings are not just for children, but also for adults. And it's also important to, swing once in a while. And it's very important for our own mental health. So yeah, this is one of the beautiful things that happens in the space. I will stop with this last project that can you see my screen now? Or wait, maybe I might need to share again.
That's right, that's fine. Just click on play and it will go full screen.
Okay. Yeah, so this is one artist book that I recently, that actually I released a year ago, called Why Can't Bras Have Buttons? And this book is primarily about an autobiography of objects that I've collected. And this was during the pandemic, with 2 years of just being locked up inside. I was just, I stayed by myself, and it was quite overwhelming to kind of be in the space and not really understanding what was going on. And the fact that touch of any sort was being restricted. So for me, I've been collecting small objects from a very young age. And for me, the idea of objects became quite important. And I started taking these objects out, and I started stitching each of these objects with a single strand of hair. And that book then became, the book is called Why Can't Bras Have Buttons? And this is what the book looks like. It's like a box format because it's a memory box, a box full of these objects and memories of mine. And this is how it opened. So I was very conscious of that the book should not have a spine, and it should be a very open-ended, because I didn't want a chronology of my life in it in that way as a timeline, because I think things happened at multiple different times. And this is how the book looked. I will read about, so each of these objects, and there was a small tiny story that was written behind. Like, for example, this particular is a negative film of my mother. And it says, Amma always says, don't hang photos on the wall. Only photos of dead people are hung on the wall. The next object is a horseshoe. I went with my father to horse ride, only to later realize that I was sitting on a donkey in OT. Yeah. The next one, a lady should not have her hands empty. I didn't like the way he tried to put the bangles in. The only thing that I could grab was a piece of her shirt as she jumped out of the car. As you can see, the strands are like single piece of my hair that I used to kind of stitch these objects. I don't know if you read that. He pulled my necklace and 13 beads fell. Yeah, so that's one book, and it's a book with 40 objects that, yeah, it's called Why Can't Bras Have Buttons? So the title of the book is primarily because one of my ex-lovers struggled to open the hook of my bra, and I kept saying, oh, why can't bras have buttons? And that's primarily the reason why the book is named that way. So I think that's about it. I'll stop sharing now.
I'm going to show you a few clips of my artwork from my very early years, and select a few strips from my cartoon art and show you tell you how I come up with the idea and what the influences are. So the cartoon bug, this was a syndicated newspaper feature where kids could send in their cartoon, and if it was selected, you would be paid 10 American dollars. It was an American syndicate, and for Canadians that means more money. And they would run it in the newspaper, and they'd give you a little critique of your work. So I was selected, and I was 13 at the time. And this is when I found out what syndication means, because I do a syndicated comic strip for the newspapers. And I thought it would just be in our newspaper, in the St. Catharines Standard. But our neighbors got the Toronto Star, and they told us that they had seen my comic in there. And I didn't understand it at the time, but that was my first introduction of a feature being sold to multiple newspapers. And the comic says it's two little kids walking outside, and they say, not very many people believe you when you tell them you were sick for Halloween. And the advice given to me at the time was not to, have such a tight rendering off at the very beginning, is to do some sketching before you do your inking. Now this is a piece of artwork that I found in amongst stuff a few years ago. And it's a picture of me and or a drawing of me and my friends when we were 16. And the reason I know that we're 16 is because I still recognize the hairstyles, and I recognize some of the clothes. So I always used to read the comics, like I would read the newspaper comics, and I would read Archie comics. And I like to buy the little Fawcett Crest collections of Peanuts. And I would draw cartoons of my own about me and my friends. And this is sort of the nucleus where my comic strip Between Friends came from. And the arrow is pointing at me. So eventually I decided I was going to try and develop a newspaper comic strip. And this is what it looked like in 1990 when I self-syndicated. I sold to a few newspapers in Southern Ontario. And all the while I was submitting to the major syndicates, and I was getting rejections. But this is about the stage of development where my editor, Jay Kennedy from King Features, called me one day and said he wanted to work with me. And if at the end of the development period, they felt the strip would be ready to sell, they would take it out for syndication. So we worked together for about 8 months. And what he worked with me mainly on was the artwork. He wanted the artwork to improve. He felt, because of the nature of my writing, that the characters should have a realistic look. He seemed happy with my writing. And so it took quite a bit of time to change the artwork, because I had been self-syndicating for a number of years in the paper, and it's like breaking a habit. But anyways, after 8 months, they decided they were going to take me out for syndication internationally. And after many years, this is how my artwork has developed over time. And so basically what my strip is about 3 women friends and the interaction between them. And if you start with Maeve, who is in the green shirt and the long hair, she's a successful executive, she's divorced. And then in the middle is Kim, who is a freelance columnist. And then there's Susan, the blonde, who is just, a typical office worker. And there's a little bit of me in each of these characters, but I think Susan is the one that I identify with the most. She's a little bit insecure, a little bit neurotic at times. And sometimes I feel like Maeve. Sometimes I feel like Kim, but I say most of the time I feel like Susan. So anyways, the strip, the gags are not written verbatim from my life, but there's aspects of my life or my friends' lives or things that I see just around, and they'll strike me, and I will write the gag from that. But it won't be exactly the same. It will be my little twist on things. Now, with this particular comic, there was in the 80s here in Canada at noon hour, there was this little 20-minute program that was called the 20-minute workout. And they had this very fit young woman on there doing exercises, and she would count down each of the moves. And so I was watching it, but this is how I turned the cartoon from that into this cartoon. 4 more, 3 more. Keep going, ladies, you can do it. Kegel exercise class. So that's how it's just, the ideas come from real life, but there's always a twist put on them. Now, when my strip went international with King Features, that was, I didn't have any children. Well, when it launched, my son was my firstborn. My son was born 6 weeks after that. And then 2 years later, I had my daughter. So after a couple of years of writing the strip, it was getting very difficult to ignore the influence of having children. So I decided it was time to bring children into the strip. And Susan was the only married character at the time, so obviously it was going to be her. But the thing is that my husband and I had faced infertility, and I had had 3 miscarriages, and I had gone to a fertility clinic for a year. And then afterwards, I successfully had 2 children of my own. But when it came to developing a storyline for Susan and Harv to have children, because of my experiences, I just couldn't bring myself to have Susan magically wake up one morning and easily just say, oh, yay, I'm pregnant. Because after everything I'd been through, to me, it seemed like a big fat fairy tale. And at the time, I didn't feel that I would be able to write about miscarriages in the mainstream newspapers. So instead, I had Susan gradually realize that she was having difficulty conceiving. And this is how I introduced this storyline. It's taking me so long to get pregnant. Maybe it's time to see a fertility specialist. That's a good idea. I feel like a failure. Listen, this has nothing to do with your womanhood, honey. Lots of women have fertility problems. Actually, I've read that in 40% of the cases, the problem is attributed to the male. Listen, this has nothing to do with your manhood, honey. So anyways, I don't really remember how long the storyline went, but it was intermittent. And I didn't write my personal story into this series, but I did draw on, the frustrations and, the upset. I used that to channel into the storyline. But the thing, while I was writing this storyline, I started to get a lot of mail about it. And I remember one woman wrote, she sent me a card, a really beautiful card, and she was so invested in the storyline, and she was going through infertility herself. And she desperately wanted to see my character couple have a baby because that is what she wanted. And I mean, I felt so bad for her because I understood, the desperation of it. And I wrote her a private letter back. But on the other hand, I was also getting a lot of mail that was saying, why is your character couple spending so much money with the fertility treatments? And so, this is where you would see the difference in the Canadian and the American healthcare situation. So anyways, a lot of people ask me, why don't you have your character couple adopt? And I got quite a bit of mail suggesting that. So there's 2 reasons that I decided, when I initially started the series, I hadn't determined how I was going to end it, other than the fact that Susan and Harv were going to have a family. But the reason I went for adoption was that because after I had done a year of fertility visits, and then I had had 2 difficult pregnancies, I was just feeling kind of pregnancy'd out, and I didn't really want to rehash the whole thing again. And then the second thing was the amount of mail that I was getting regarding adoption. So I did some research. I interviewed a friend of mine who had gone through the adoption process, and I had to blur the lines a bit again between the Canadian and American systems, because those were the main number of newspapers that I had. So in the end, Harv and Susan end up adopting a little girl named Emma, who is about 7 or 8 months old. And this is the strip on the day that they meet her. Hello, Emma. Hello, daughter. The reason that the little yellow bird that Susan uses to entice Emma into her arms, I drew that because my kids had a little big bird, a wind-up doll with the music, and that was their favorite toy. And so that's what I used. This actually, this strip was the first time that I generated significant mail, and I had people send me pictures of their children. I had people send me their adoption stories, their own personal stories. And I had one gentleman, I remember very clearly, write to me and say that I had better do right by this baby or he's going to be very upset. So that was the first indication to me of the power of comics and how invested readers would get in the characters. Now here's another lighter side. I was shopping for groceries and passing the magazine rack, and I saw a magazine with an article title on the cover that said, "Look Better Naked." And I thought, oh, great, here's more pressure. So this is the strip that I came up with after seeing that magazine. Anything interesting? Yeah, I'm reading an article called "Look Better Naked." Want to read it when I'm finished? Me? Ha, girl, I don't need to read that. I already look great naked. But if there's anything in there about looking passable in a pair of jeans. Now the black character here, her name is Helen, and she is Maeve's assistant at the office. And I particularly like Helen. She's just a secondary character, but she's very no nonsense. She's very confident. It's funny how she sort of revealed herself. I didn't create her. She just sort of came to be the character that she is. But she's a full-figured woman. And in over 30 years of writing my strip, I have never once written a strip where she has been anything but comfortable in her own skin. And she has a positive body image. And I'm proud that to have a character like that in the strip. This was, I was asked by the Canadian Cancer Society if I would create a series of comics to help them with their campaign to promote mammograms for women over the age of 50. And they told me what issues women had, and then they left it to me to create a series of strips. So this is one example. I'm nervous about this mammogram, Maeve. You're taking charge of your health, Helen. Why am I here? Why am I exposing myself like this? Why am I squashing my boobs between these two plastic? That's it, Helen, let's do the other one. Why was I so worried? And what the campaign was doing is there was something called the thingamaboob, which the little 3 pink balls, and they were the different sizes that women could detect a lump in their breast through self-examination or through the doctor or through a mammogram. And this is a poster that they used to send to doctors' offices. And those are the 3 strips that I created for the series. Now, this is outside of my Between Friends comic strip. Probably in the UK, you wouldn't know this, but in Canada, and I'm assuming the States, there was a commercial called Freedom 55, and it was an insurance commercial. And the idea behind the commercials were that you plan for your future, and by 55, you would be able to retire with tons of money. So I was 56. I changed this to Freedom 56, and my daughter was about to go off to university. My son was already at university about an hour and a half away, but that wasn't far enough for my daughter. She decided to go 3 provinces away to Nova Scotia, and I'm in Ontario. So this was going to be different for me because both of the kids were gone. And I wrote a series of 4 graphic essays, which appeared in the Toronto Star and the Montreal Gazette. And it detailed from the beginning to her actually leaving. And I'm not going to show you all of it. I'm just going to show you the beginning of this first essay. So this is Freedom 56, my first year as an empty nester. As of September 1st, I'm going to be home alone, not counting my husband and the dog. For the first time in 20 years, I won't have any kids in the house. Did someone ask me to make them a sandwich? Must have been the wind. My son and daughter will both be away at university and I will be an empty nester. How did this happen? I always thought empty nesters were old people. Who the heck are you? So this was actually quite challenging. And I was going to, in the midst, once it had been accepted, I was having so much trouble with it that I was almost going to say, forget it. And I thought, well, you can't do that. No one will ever take anything I want to try and sell them again. But the response, I really enjoyed the response. I had people, they realized when I said my daughter was moving to Halifax that she was going to Dalhousie, and they would write to me and say, well, we'll see you on the plane. And another woman wrote, and she was telling me how she couldn't bear to empty her daughter's bedroom. And again, how personal people, they can identify with the comics. It was fun to do. It was a challenge, and it sort of stretched me a bit. And then back to Between Friends. As the years have gone by, I've aged my characters, and the most obvious reason for that is because I have aged myself. And so, you know, among other things, I will periodically address these types of issues. Susan, it's time for you to make some lifestyle changes. Okay, for how long? It's not that I forget, it's that I choose not to be bothered to remember. And yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm holding to it. I have also done some greeting cards with Noble Works cards, and this I think is my best-selling one, Girls Night Out. And another one, I am woman, hear me roar. Feminist, menopausal. And that's it.
Yes, like I said, I'm an illustrator, a graphic novelist, comic artist, and I also do children's illustrations. So this is a project that I was doing recently with a author also from near where I'm from, and it's about a fairy tale land set under Cumbria. So I do stuff like that as well. I also do short comics. So this was a spread from a short comic that I did over lockdown, inspired by lockdown. This is another one called Two Stones, which you can also find on my website, but I'll read through it now because I don't want to skip through it and you can't read it because that's kind of annoying. So this is Two Stones. We slot together like fingers. I hold you, you hold me. Two stones, but one shape. The weather shakes our bodies, but we are together. The only thing that will tear us apart is if one of us crumbles. The wind carries broken trees, man-made rocks from dry stone walls trailing the mountainside. Climbers etch their initials into my back. Our environment shifts. Urban footprints. I didn't notice it at first. The slow, succinct scraping of our heads burrowed together. My body shifts. I catch your eyes. The only thing that will tear us apart is if one of us crumbles. The landscape beats at my smooth exterior until I am jagged and worn. Down I fall, the wind carries me further as I rode away. I land in a stream. I can no longer see the summit where you stand. Fish glide past me as my thoughts glide away with them. I am sharp-edged and small now. I used to be so great. You built me up to be a mountain of my own. The water washes over me. I begin to soften. A child sees me. She picks me up. I've been so untouched I hadn't noticed my smooth face. The water makes me shine. She carries me in her pocket. I feel the fleece hugging my eyes. She takes me out and the warm sun buries itself into me. She nestles me in the crevice of a rock. It's you. I found you again. Once more, one shape, two stones. So that was a little short comic that I did. Pretty much all of my stories are based on my own personal experiences because I'm immediately invested in them. And doing these little short projects has been brilliant for experimenting and being confident in finishing one project and exploring an idea and then completing it. So if you are a comic artist, I fully recommend doing a few short projects and finishing them. So this is my graphic novel that's coming out in 2024, which is about when my brother had cancer and my family's experience. And so the main character wakes up one day to find they've physically grown to the size of a giant, which is meant to act as three metaphors: the physical mutation of cancer, the feeling of being the elephant in the room, but also the giant strength he takes away with him following his recovery. So, oh, hang on. Yeah, so once again, based on a really raw personal experience. But I've found that in doing that, I create something, I create my best work. And the motivation is that someone else will feel understood that is experiencing something similar. So that's why I've put this in here. So Lighter Than My Shadow by Katie Green is my favorite graphic novel because when I read this, so it's a graphic memoir about Katie's experience with anorexia. And I had anorexia as a teenager, and I read this book and it was a pinnacle moment in my own recovery. So it made me realize that creating something based on your own trauma can really help someone else, sort of turn something negative into something positive, which has been a huge motivation for me with my work because it gives me a lot of purpose with what I'm creating. So this is actually the first sketch that I ever did for Giant, which turned into this. But I drew this whilst my brother was still going through chemo, but that was the sketch that came to my mind, was this sort of trying to live your life normally. They're all sat around having dinner, but there's this huge literal elephant in the room all the time. The whole time is that you're just aware that you've got this huge shadow looming over you. So that was the start of this. I mean, for With Two Stones, the comic I read before, it started as a poem and I unpacked it sort of panel by panel. But the consistent thing that I've noticed when I'm creating is that I tend to be drawn to starting with a visual metaphor that captures something that I'm feeling. So with Two Stones, it was the two stones sort of nestled together. That's sort of when you're in a relationship, and then when one of you's going through a hard time and you're sort of like up against each other and coming back together again. With Giant, it felt like it needed to be this huge looming thing that you can't ignore. So the book here, this is a page from the book. So the whole thing is silent, which felt really natural because I started with a sketch as opposed to writing anything, because it felt like the easiest way to get that across. But it also, it works really well because you can project your own experiences onto it as a reader and almost write the words yourself while you're reading it, which makes it more relatable to the individual, as well as having the sort of simple faces. It could be anyone. So that was really important to me, is that anyone could read this going through something similar and feel like their story is in there, which is why I've been working with cancer care, which has been amazing. It's been part of my Arts Council funding that Nicola helped me with, which has been incredible. And so as part of my Arts Council funding, I've been talking to people that have their own experiences with cancer and sort of based on what they're saying, thinking about what needs to be more prominent in my own story. So I spoke to someone about the things that made them laugh during their sort of journey, and that made me reflect on the things that made like my brother laugh or me laugh throughout, or people in my family, that sort of gets you through. So that's actually in the book now that I'd kind of not paid much attention to. So yeah, it's important to me to hear sort of along the way how other people, how other people's stories are similar. But it's interesting because it's not just people through cancer care that have stories with cancer. As soon as you start talking about cancer, everyone has a story with cancer. And so actually talking about it and putting it out there, you realize that, you know, this is a big thing that's happening all around, and it shouldn't be the sort of dreaded C word. It should be something that people talk about, because a lot of the sort of understanding of cancer is based on what we see in the media, what we see on in like adverts, and it's always the scariest thing. It's always, you know, my sister's keeper, and so sort of scary adverts, and like obviously it can be scary and it can be that extreme, but it was important to me to show tell a really honest story that shows that pain and shows the trauma and the mental health implications and the medical journey, but also to show that there is hope, and that a lot of, you know, if you have a diagnosis with cancer, that it doesn't mean that you're going to have a my sister's keeper situation. It means, you know, there is like, there can be hope, and yeah, just going through that, the journey that me and my family faced. So this is another page from the book. So the whole book is done in ballpoint pen, and on cartridge paper, and then scanned in, and I edit everything together on Photoshop and InDesign. And so I just wanted to go through my process a little bit. So basically, once I've got my metaphor and I kind of know what my idea, my sort of first idea, I just make a mess. And I was talking to Nicola about this the other day, that writing is the process of making a massive mess and then trying to sort of pick out the bits that work. At least that's my experience of it. And you'll do 100 million drafts. And even now I'm sort of actually writing it, I still change things as I go. So yeah, loads of sketches, writing, voice memos, finding like pictures and inspirations from everywhere, and just trying to figure out where the story is, picking it out from the sort of strongest bits. But definitely, I suppose what I'm trying to get across is not to be disheartened that it will probably look awful for such a huge period of the project, but if you care about it and you're invested in it, which is what is important to me, is being invested in it emotionally, and you sort of push through it, you will pick it out. So I wanted to recommend Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Is an amazing book. Like if you were sort of going on this journey and wanting to start a graphic novel, that's a really good book that's written like a comic. It's got amazing advice, and it actually, obviously, because it's done like a graphic novel, he shows you what he's talking about by doing it. That's a really good book. I feel bad putting Masterclass up there because it's expensive, and I was lucky enough that my friend had a guest pass for 2 weeks. But if you have got access to Masterclass, or you can, see, I had a free pass for 2 weeks, but and I think it's meant to be to show you what it can be like, but I binged watched all of it in 2 weeks. But there are some amazing like video footage from massive authors like Neil Gaiman and Margaret Atwood, and Amy Tan was my favorite one. And that I just watched all these videos and wrote notes, and that was amazing. You can then transfer that onto writing comics, graphic novels, and traditional fiction. And the other one was just read your favorite graphic novels and pick them apart page by page, understand them page by page, because you look at it, it's this daunting masterpiece, but actually if you dissect it, you can start to understand how they've done it. And I did this with several of my favorite graphic novels, and you start to go, oh, okay, so this is what they're doing here, and then you let that influence your own work. So I wanted to put this up. This feels silly putting this up, but the reason I wanted to put this up is that all of these things that have happened because I've poked people. And I wanted to, basically, the first year since when I left uni, I studied illustration and then at Edinburgh, and then I graduated, and then my brother was diagnosed with cancer, and for a year I didn't do anything apart from work and try and get out of debt, and I wasn't feeling creative, and I wasn't putting myself out there. And it wasn't until I was in a position where I felt like creative and like I could poke people and get my work out in front of people that the balls started rolling for me. So I became one of Broken Frontier's 6 to watch in 2021, simply because I tweeted them my work on Small Press Day. And then a lot of these things that are happening have come up because I got Arts Council funding with the help of Nicola. So I'm going to keep singing Nicola's praises because she's been amazing, and involving myself in the comics community. And I think the only one that on there that I didn't get by just poking people, it was Creative Boom, that interview, and they just found me because I did a different interview. So once you do it, it starts to. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, don't give up putting your work in front of people, even though it's very disheartening. I've done it many, many times and not got anything back. But when, so I put my graphic novel in front of an agent after following many, many agents on Twitter at 3 a.m. And I was lucky enough that James, my agent, who's lovely, came back, and yeah, and then he circulated my first chapter of Giant to publishers, and then it got picked up. But before any of that, I didn't really have an audience. So it's going back and honing your craft and then showing people and just keep going with it, even when you get nothing back. Because you can be a paid artist. It's just a painful journey, but you can. So yeah, that's what I wanted to land on. Please bombard me with questions, because I've just bombarded you with a lot of information all at once.